The economy was doing quite poorly even before the COVID crisis. And the government's response every time the Reserve Bank or anybody would say, look, we need more stimulus, their standard response was, we'll build more infrastructure. Again, it was around lots of concrete, lots of blokes building stuff, except you don't need a lot of blokes to build stuff nowadays because we've got lots of capital, lots of machinery that help them do it.
One for mum, one for dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be in Australia.
Dead, buried, cremated.
How good is Australia?
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Institute, and we're recording this on the 23rd of June 2020. The government at one point was spending upwards of $20 billion a day during the height of the pandemic. And before this pandemic is over, it's likely that hundreds of billions more of taxpayers' money will be spent before this is all over. But how will that money be spent? On those who need it most or on friends of the government? Last week on Follow the Money, we talked about the pink-collar recession and how women are disproportionately bearing the brunt of this COVID recession. This week I'm talking to our senior economist Matt Grudnoff about how and why the government seems to be putting most of its resources into jobs for the boys and not so much into jobs for the girls.
This stimulus package for the construction sector is aimed at what the Prime Minister calls a tradie-led stimulus for new home buyers and renovators.
We're expecting between 25 and 30,000 new builds or significant...
Really, the construction industry is predominantly male-dominated. Of course, there's no doubt about it.
In this fall, women and younger people have been overrepresented in terms of the falls and a lot of that is around the structure of the industries that have been most affected, arts and recreation, retail.
It would be incredibly disappointing if the government found billions of dollars for residential construction but not a cent for social housing.
We have social housing problems right across this country. And the other thing is we have shovel-ready projects ready to go in infrastructure. Where did this come from? You have to ask, what the hell is in their cigars these days? I don't think that putting a gold-plated toilet seat in your bathroom is going to save 450,000 jobs, mate.
Thanks for your great interest in housing.
G'day, Matt.
G'day, Ebony.
So the reason why we wanted to talk about this, last week we talked a little bit about the idea of a pink-collar recession and how women are disproportionately bearing the brunt of this. And we touched briefly on the fact that when the government has announced kind of big fiscal stimulus measures, they seem to be focused on very kind of blokey projects. Things like the HomeBuilder grant. Can you, just to kick us off, take us through the HomeBuilder grant? How much is it worth and who is it available to?
So the HomeBuilder grant is quite an odd little stimulus package. It's very traditional and it's sort of designed to create jobs by building stuff. And in particular, it's basically being handed out $25,000 to people who are either building a new home or who are renovating their home. And before you think, well, 25 grand's quite a lot for, putting in a new kitchen, the renovation has to be at least $150,000. So that's a lot of kitchens and bathrooms. It's more like putting another story on your house. And so the government will kick in $25,000 if you put up $150,000 for a renovation or you buy a new house. And this is going to cost the budget, the Treasury estimates, $680 million. So it's not a massive stimulus package. It's actually relatively small compared to recent announcements. But yes, it's kind of very narrow in its focus.
And so that's a little bit of, I guess, some detail about how it will work. And I guess for many people, that number...
It's not going to work for them.
Yeah, have to cost $150,000 in renovations before you even qualify for the $25,000 grant. That really puts it out of reach of a lot of people, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the point. It's not actually going to help a lot of people, which is why the budget cost is not that large. And Also, when you're thinking about these kind of policies as an economist, you're thinking about them in terms of wanting to stimulate additional construction. So if you just hand out $25,000 to everybody who was already going to build a house or do a huge renovation like that, then it doesn't really actually create any new jobs. You're just handing out money to people. So it needs to sort of stimulate or convince people who wouldn't otherwise have constructed something, or people who were thinking, oh, well, maybe next year or the year after I'll do it, but since this grant's come along, I'll bring it forward and I'll do it now. So they're the kind of things that you're looking to try and do. Unfortunately, because they're such large things like building an entirely new house or a $150,000 renovation, that takes time to kind of organise, and you've actually got to sign a contract before the end of this year, so by the 31st of December 2020. And it would actually be really difficult to get all your paperwork and all your stuff in line in that short amount of time. So really, this 25K will probably mostly just go to people who are already started the process of building a new home or who have already committed to doing a large renovation.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really struck me. It seemed to me that with that short time frame, it would be going essentially to people who already had this in the works, not necessarily to new construction.
And that's right. And we've also got to consider that construction doesn't actually employ that many people.
Yeah, so Matt, I was going to ask you about that. So that's kind of the theme that we're going with here today. Obviously, even though this package is small in comparison to something like JobKeeper or JobSeeker, it's intended to stimulate the construction industry. And we've heard, I guess, a lot about the importance of propping up those kinds of jobs. But construction, really, it's a pretty male-dominated industry, isn't it?
Yes, exactly right. So it's mostly blokes in construction, and also construction doesn't actually hire that many people for every additional $1 million you put in. So the way economists think about employment intensity, which is what we're talking about, is if I gave an industry an extra $1 million, how many extra jobs would be created by that? And in construction, you're looking at only 1.2 additional jobs for every $1 million. And we can further break that 1.2 jobs down, and we can say that for every $1 million in construction, it'll be 1 extra male job and 0.2 extra female jobs. So the vast majority of the extra jobs created will be males.
Yeah, so not even one job per $1 million for a woman.
That's right. You need $5 million for every one woman that's employed. And remember, we're talking about 680 million, so we're talking about 700 extra jobs or thereabouts, a little bit over.
Not really going to put a dent in our unemployment rate in the scheme of things at the moment. But that's not to say that spending on stimulus measures, isn't desirable. We've talked a lot about the fact that the government has a big role here to play in propping up demand and building nation-building projects and other elements. We've certainly talked about the benefits of certain types of construction, but what are overall the drawbacks of this type of package compared to spending, $680 million on, anything else?
Yeah, look, I mean, the big drawback is construction doesn't actually employ that many people per $1 million put in. So let me give you an example. If instead of putting the $680 million into construction, the government said instead, let's say we're going to put an extra $680 million into mental health. Our mental health system is pretty woeful. There's certainly shortages, and getting good quality care is very, very difficult. So if we put more money into mental health rather than construction, how many extra jobs would that create? Well, healthcare and social assistance generates not 1.2 jobs like construction, but 10.2 jobs for every $1 million. So it employs just under 10 times as many people for the amount of money you put in. And if we look at the split between males and females, for every $1 million put in, almost 8 jobs go to women and 2.3 jobs go to men. Now, you might think, well, men are missing out there. But if you consider back to construction still only, even though it was the vast majority were male, was still only 1 job per million people. So in healthcare, we've got 2.3 male jobs per million people. So it's even better off for men if we put the money into something like mental health.
And the idea, again, comes back to that the government really has to be targeting its spending where it's needed most. And so while it might be good for blokes in construction, it's not really going to do anything to help, unemployed tourism operators in Queensland or those types of things.
Well, exactly right. I mean, even accommodation and food services, for example, that's 9.5 jobs per million. Remember, construction's 1.2. So again, it's about 8 or 9 times more. Retail trade is relatively low at 3, but it's still more than twice as much as construction. So if you look down all the different industries that we have, things like education is the best, 14.5 jobs per million people. So there are all these other industries that employ so many more people than construction does. And the reason that construction employs a relatively few people is because it's what economists call capital intensive. That is, there is a lot of machinery that takes the place of workers, and so you need less people power in order to produce stuff in construction than you do in something like healthcare, which requires a lot of people to deliver that service.
And where does this, I guess, kind of attention to these blokey types of jobs really come from? Is it the fact that we just need to reimagine what a real job looks like now, and that more often than not looks like a service in today's economy? Or is it just, a bit of a historical relic?
Well, I mean, the first time we sort of really started to use government spending to provoke, to increase employment, or the first kind of in the sort of modern era that we were doing that, was during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Now, during the Great Depression, the vast majority of people that worked in the 1930s were men. So, and also construction actually was very employment intensive. There wasn't as much machinery in construction in the 1930s, 90 years ago, than there is today. And so putting a lot of money in to construct things like the Sydney Harbour Bridge was built during the Great Depression.
1,000 men were employed building the bridge. The Australians proved as skilled tradesmen as any I had experience with in Britain or America.
There were lots and lots of people constructing that bridge. At the time, they called it the iron lung because it kept so many families going. And so it was very labour intensive. Unfortunately, that was 90 years ago, and the economy has changed quite a lot in the last 90 years. Unfortunately, I don't think our politicians, particularly the current government, has really changed its thinking around what creates jobs. So they've got this idea that construction is very labour intensive and it'll employ lots of people. And even before the recession came along, the economy was doing quite poorly, even before the COVID crisis. And the government's response every time the Reserve Bank or anybody would say, look, we need more stimulus, their standard response was, we'll build more infrastructure. Again, it was around lots of concrete, lots of blokes building stuff, except that there wasn't a lot of blokes building stuff because you don't need a lot of blokes to build stuff nowadays because we've got lots of capital, lots of machinery that help them do it.
And on the other side of the equation, where we've got women's unemployment falling much faster than men's, yet it seems really the government hasn't delivered anything for Australian women who've been caught out by this recession. And even further than that, for example, childcare workers aren't going to be able to access JobKeeper from next month, and free childcare, which was a policy that the government implemented during the height of the pandemic in order to enable parents to keep going to work, that's going to stop from next month as well. That's more or less a double whammy for women there. Has the government really done much of anything to help Australian women who are struggling at the moment?
Well, I have to say the childcare package, you would have to say, was designed to help women. It's just really unfortunate that is not only the first thing they've cut back, but the only thing so far that they have cut back. It's pretty amazing that the only industry, if you're employed, well, maybe apart from universities as well, but the only industry that currently gets JobKeeper that's getting cut from it are childcare workers, and they're getting cut from it early, despite the government promising that they wouldn't cut anybody out before the end of September. It's pretty amazing that not only are women losing... So, for example, female employment has fallen over 5% since March, or from March through April, which is what we've got figures for, whereas men's employment has fallen by less than 4%. The hours worked is even more stark. So the hours worked, women are working at the moment, has fallen 11.5%. Whereas men's hours worked has fallen 7.5%. So women are losing employment at a faster rate than men, and yet all of our policy responses so far that the government's had have been around helping men get employed, not women. And if we even look at the recent higher education reforms, in inverted commas,
the cost of studying humanities at uni is set to double, but the price of degrees that lead to in-demand jobs like nursing, maths and teaching will be slashed.
Ecology, teaching, agriculture, maths and science will pay between 20 and 62% of what the same course would have cost this year.
We need young Australians to help us grow our economy.
The government's decided to make sort of STEM-style degrees cheaper. Now, the majority of people who do STEM degrees are males, and they're increasing humanities-type degrees, and most of the people who do humanity degrees are females. So not only, are women going to have larger HECS debts at the end of this, but they're not even going to have the free childcare when they want to go out and work.
And it's worth noting as well that while a lot of the focus around those university changes were on the humanities aspect of it, when you look at it overall, the government's really reducing how much it's contributing to university education overall and putting that burden much more onto students as well.
And to bring that back to employment intensity, education and training, the industry that employs the most per $1 million, 15 people per $1 million. And that's the area that the government's cutting back on. Also universities are not covered by JobKeeper. So, the way the government is handling the response, it's good that they're spending extra money. JobKeeper is a good policy, but they could do so much more and do it in a much more efficient way to get more and better employment outcomes than they're currently doing.
Yeah, so that was, I guess, going to be my final question. Obviously, there's always going to be disagreements about how the government implements policies and different government policies. And overall, obviously, like you said, we've thought JobKeeper was a good idea, that doubling JobSeeker was a very good idea to take people out of poverty. But, I mean, what is the problem if the government poorly targets its stimulus spending? What does that mean for the economy? What does that mean for people who've lost their job?
Well, it means one of two things. It means either the government has to spend more money in order to get the same amount of employment increase, or it means if they fix the amount of money they're spending, we're going to get less employment out of it. So that the unemployment rate, if you like, is going to be higher because the government isn't targeting better. So a well-targeted stimulus package that was targeted towards industries that will create lots of jobs means the government has to spend less money to get more employment. And it's what economists call efficient. It'll be more efficient. And my fear is because this government seems to obsess far more than it should about budget surpluses in particular, that rather than spend more money to get the same sort of employment outcome, what they'll do is simply just accept a higher unemployment rate. And we need to remember, and we haven't had one in almost 30 years, recessions are horrible things. They're not just horrible economically, and as an economist, I like to obsess about the economics of stuff, but they're horrible socially. Like they really ruin people's lives. They're in the 1990s, early 90s recession, there are a whole bunch of people who are about 55 years old who lost their job in the early 90s, who never got a job again. They were unemployed for the rest of their life, and then they eventually went on to the age pension. Young people are disproportionately impacted by these kind of things, and the youth unemployment rate will climb far higher than the unemployment rate for the rest of society. These are not great. Recessions are horrible things, and we should avoid them at almost any cost. And my worry is that this sort of inefficient response means that we're going to have a higher unemployment rate and more scarring, both economically and socially.
And presumably a longer recession.
Absolutely. It will take longer to recover. Recessions, we slide into them very quickly, as we've seen. It might seem a long time ago, but basically we're talking mid-March was when we started to close things down, which is only a few months ago. But, a deep recession like this, if it's poorly handled, could last years.
Well, we might wrap it up there. Thanks very much, Matt.
End on a cheery note. You're welcome.
This has been a special episode of Follow the Money, and we're aiming to bring you shorter but more frequent episodes during the pandemic, so please stay tuned, and if you can, leave us a review. It helps other people to find the podcast. You can check out the Australia Institute's Economics of a Pandemic webinar series at our website, tai.org.au/webinars. We've got 2 webinars coming up soon. The next one is on Wednesday, the 24th of June at 11 a.m. with Richard Dennis on how we can build back better, not just bigger. And on Thursday, the 25th of June, we're talking to Aboriginal health professionals about the success of the Aboriginal-led health response to the pandemic. The webinars are free, but registration is essential. For the latest health information, you can check health.gov.au or listen to the ABC's excellent CoronaCast podcast, which comes out daily. You can visit tai.org.au for all our latest research and content, and we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a NNT, and Matt is at Matt Grudnoff. That's GRUDNOFF. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macey with help from Grace Crivellaro, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum. Stay safe, and thanks for listening.